Mike, thank you so much for joining the Global Ed podcast series, where in this episode we'll be considering the impact of AI tools in K-12 education settings. Kicking straight off with my first question, if you could tell me a bit about your background and journey to date as to where you are now as Principal Group Product Manager for Education at Microsoft.
Sure. Well, I'm one of these career Microsoft people. I'm born and raised at Microsoft. I joined straight out of college back in 1995, if you can believe that, back at the birth of Windows 95. And
Wow.
I started in engineering, and I started actually if you've heard of Outlook, a lot of people have heard of Outlook. It was before Outlook even had shipped. It was a code name top secret product at the time. So that's where I started at Microsoft, and I worked in various engineering jobs in the company. And then probably in 2014, almost 10 years ago, I switched over to product management. And I had worked on OneNote in engineering, and then I switched over and started experimenting with education concepts with OneNote, but I switched from engineering into product management. So then in about 2014, myself and another guy, you may or may not have heard of something called the OneNote class notebook, which is sort of a education supercharged version of OneNote. So we were hacking and experimenting with that, and it got really popular. And so then I started working full time on education and OneNote, and then Microsoft formed what is now the Microsoft Education team about maybe a year later, so in 2015. And so then I moved from doing education on the OneNote team into this new Microsoft Education team and staying in product management. I've worked on the Microsoft Education team ever since. And so we've done things like the immersive reader, we've done teams for education, we've done learning accelerators. Now we're doing a lot of AI. So sort of since then, that's been the path.
Fantastic. And you say 2015, the education
Yeah,
team was set
it's
up.
been around almost 10 years now.
Yeah, yeah, wow. And in terms of, I mean, incredible what you've done in a relatively short period of time, I suppose. But yeah, that's sort of the birth of AI now, and seeing it all kick off for in real earnest is just fascinating. So, in
Yeah.
terms of your guiding philosophy for building AI powered tools, do you and your team have a philosophy in mind in terms of a high level perspective, in terms of all tools that you look to create for education?
Yeah, I think we do. First off, I would say, especially with AI, Microsoft has something that we call responsible AI, which especially in education is really critical, really important. And that is things like accountability, transparency, inclusiveness, and a whole set of principles that guide us, just making sure everything is, especially in education, extra safe and fair and transparent. So I would say that's a broadly guiding principle, whether it's educators or students or staff. I think on the educator side, we really focus, I think, saving time and letting teachers be efficient, giving teachers time back, letting them get rid of more of the drudgerous work. I think that's one of the core principles, or letting them, another example is letting them scale out and do things that maybe they couldn't do previously because it was so time consuming or so drudgerous. So on the educator side and related to staff, it's really about saving time, being more efficient, helping them scale out. Also, with some of these tools, it's providing them data that is helpful. So, how can we easily provide teachers useful data? That's always something we think about because it's so time consuming and some of the tools can be so complex with data analysis that a lot of educators just don't have the time to dig into that. And
Yeah.
then on the student side, I think with AI, a lot of it is starting out, it's personalization. It can be making sure it's inclusive. I would say across the board, we look at inclusive and accessible tools and building them in from the ground up, sort of built in, not bolted on. And I've worked with inclusive and accessible tools for almost a decade and built a lot of those. So that's been something that's not new, but with AI, personalization, inclusive and accessible, and you can make it more engaging. As we'll talk about some of the products, because AI allows a really high level of personalization, that can also allow them to be more engaging and more interesting for students.
And in terms of the areas that you look to help try and solve and try and advance, are there particular principles in terms of the problems that you try to solve? Is that sort of a two-way relationship by talking to schools and understanding what their needs are, what educators' needs are? How do you go a bit about that in terms of looking at the tools that you want to create in the first place?
Yeah, oftentimes it is talking. We talk to a lot of educators and a lot of schools around the world. That's the other thing is we don't just talk to, you're in the
Mm.
UK, I'm in the US. We don't just talk to US schools or UK schools. We are a global company, and what's nice is we build communities globally. So we have kind of a wide range of folks we talk to. We look for patterns, we look for challenges that they're having. Some of these tools, like we'll talk about maybe later, reading progress came directly from interviewing a whole lot of educators about some of the challenges they were having. And so I think that's a great place to start. And then we also just look at industry trends and what are schools and school systems looking for. And with the pandemic, the pandemic ending, but there's still a lot of challenges with just core reading and mathematics and some of those areas. So we also think about, can we have purpose-built tools versus just tweaking Word or tweaking
Yeah.
an existing app? And sometimes that's the best thing to do, but sometimes you want to say, okay, let's do a purpose-built version that solves a very specific education problem versus just changing or tweaking the existing product.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And in terms of focusing on some of these new tools now, so Reading Coach, Math Progress, etc., I'd love to dive into these in a little bit more depth. So, yeah, if you could walk us through those, the most recent tools that you've started to roll out, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, and I'll talk about maybe two groups that have actually rolled out. One of these learning accelerators, and I'll talk about that. And then there's also just some AI for educator features that are just built in and available for all educators who use Teams, and those are also new. But for the first batch, something we call learning accelerators is the umbrella term, and they're all free. These are all built into Microsoft 365. They're all available free. And the idea was there's foundational skills and then there's future ready skills. At least that's the way we've broken it down into. And foundational might be reading, math, and well-being. And then future ready are things like public speaking, information literacy, and search. And then also everything we do with these learning accelerators is wrapped in insights. And we also call them our AI enhanced learning accelerators. And I'll just give you an example. So the first one we ever built was something called Reading Progress and Reading Coach. And the idea was, again, we interviewed a lot of educators around the world about what challenges are you having when you're checking reading or building reading skills. And in particular, oral reading fluency, which is practicing reading out loud, was a challenge. That the idea would be the educator takes a student out into the hallway, the educator has a stopwatch and a pencil, and each the student and the educator have a passage, and the student reads it out loud, and the teacher is timing them and circling words they mispronounce, and it's very time consuming. The teachers don't like doing it because it's so time consuming, one at a time, out in the hallway, back in, out in, back in. And the kids are going crazy while the teacher is out in the hallway. And the students typically don't like it because it can be stigmatizing. They don't like reading out loud in front of someone, especially students with dyslexia or struggling readers or non-native speakers. So no one likes this process. And we said, well, how can we have AI maybe help speed up and scale this process for educators, give them data and insights, and then the students feel less stigmatized because they don't have to read out loud in front of a person who's sitting there judging them, essentially. And that was the birth of Reading Progress. And so what this allows an educator to do is assign a reading passage out to the entire class. And then, for example, if I assign a passage to my class now, the students can open up this passage on their computer and we record them with audio and actually record their video. So the teacher can see them reading and the student reads the passage out loud. And back to that inclusive nature, the surface that the student reads that passage on is very inclusive. It's based on our immersive reader technology. It's a bunch of science and research around reading. So it's inclusive and the students can adapt the way that passage looks in a way that works for them.
Mm.
And so the teacher assigns that passage out and the student reads it out loud and records themselves reading. And then AI is analyzing it as it's going on. So it's listening to them read. What are they mispronouncing? What's their reading speed? And when they're done reading, each student gets a set of practice words that's personalized just to them. And so what that means is they get personalized practice. They can drill in, they can practice reading out loud, they're getting that feedback, but all that data goes back to the educator.
Mm.
So now instead of doing one at a time, the educator can get 30 submissions of the students reading, and the AI has done like the first draft of analyzing that for the educators, the reading speed, the accuracy, all the data, all the trends. The teacher can now play the video, they can see the student reading, they can jump around, they can listen, they can mark it up themselves or enhance it if they want. So they can choose to let the AI do it. They can choose to go into manual mode, like in a car, or they can do a hybrid mode, which is, yeah, I'll look at the AI first draft, but I'll just check it myself in bits and pieces. So that's a way that lets them scale and get much more reading fluency done. Now that they're doing more reading fluency, they get more practice. And the students like it because they're not stigmatized and not having a person sit next to them all the time. And so what we found is we actually did a large scale study because the first question people say is, "Hey, Mike, that sounds great. You're the product manager explaining this product. I'm sure you think it's amazing." But we did a large scale study in the United States last year. We had a group of 700 students using Reading Progress and 700 students doing it the original way. That's 700 testing each way is a fairly large group.
Mm.
And the tests in the beginning of the year, tests in the middle of the year, and then or middle of the year, and tests at the end of the year to compare. And it turned out that scores improved for the group using Reading Progress, and especially for people who are non-native speakers. Someone who's not an English language native speaker in our case, their scores went up even more. And so we had a lot of science and research going into the development of this tool, and it works.
Mm.
So that's just one example of how our reading learning accelerator works. We've just come out with math progress recently, which allows the educator to help tailor and generate different all sorts of practice types of questions and work with students as they're working through those problems. The students get feedback. And again, I won't go into too many details on math, but in a similar way, we use AI to help educators scale out, and then we have the student who gets that personalized practice. I suppose the last one I'll just mention for learning accelerators, because again, I think it's a new one that we've just come out with, and it's something that educators just can't do without AI, and students don't get this level of feedback without AI. And that's all about public speaking and communicating with your speaker progress and speaker coach.
Mm.
So we interviewed many higher ed students and many high school and middle school students, and they told us we'd love to get more feedback on how we present, how we communicate. That's a quote future ready skill that they know they want to improve on. But the only way to get that is from literally an educator doing, if you've heard of Toastmasters in the UK, I don't know if there's the,
Yeah.
I mean, unless the teacher is sitting there maybe once a term giving them feedback on their speech presentation to the class, they're just not going to get the right level of feedback. It's just
Yeah.
too hard and too time consuming.
Yeah.
With speaker progress, the educator can actually make that same type of assignment. The students can upload their PowerPoint. It captures their audio and their video. They can practice presenting, and they get all sorts of AI feedback and coaching, whether it's your pace, your pitch, your filler words, the ahs, the ums, the likes, and all these little filler words and verbal tics that people have. And all that is captured and is given back to the student, and it's given back to the teacher, and it's tracked over time. That's the progress component for speaker progress. So again, that's just a nice way of, okay, in the old world, teachers do not have the time to give real-time Toastmasters feedback to every person in the class on a regular basis. They can't scale. AI can help them scale. Student gets that personalized feedback and coaching. Everybody's happy. So those are the learning accelerators. And happy to answer other questions you might have on those. And I can talk about some of the AI features that we have for educators as well, separately, just productivity features.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the speaker progress one is particularly interesting. And you mentioned that was that rolled out a couple of months ago, was it? Was
Yeah,
it?
it's recently rolled out in multiple
Yeah.
languages as well.
Yeah.
And those are
And
all available in Teams for Education, and they're free.
okay. And in terms of feedback from teachers and students, particularly on the speaker progress side of things, what kind of feedback have you had from that tool at the moment?
Well, it's interesting. It's quite similar to reading progress. Teachers love it because they say, "Oh, now I can make assignments and I can see how my students are progressing and I'm doing things that I did not have time to do."
Yeah.
Students like it because all of a sudden they're saying, "Oh, we're aware of all," especially the filler words, the one that most people are not aware that they do is what are called these filler words, where it's like
Yeah,
um. And when people hear it, usually it's a little bit disconcerting at first because it records everything and it's giving you this feedback. It says, "Oh, you said 20 times.
yeah.
You said the word like 15 times."
I used to do that a
But
lot.
yeah, but once you see that feedback, a lot of students have said, "Okay, this is actually interesting. It's valuable. It's,
Yeah.
it's right there in my face. Now I have something I can work on."
And do you feel that students actually find it more comfortable talking to, in a weird way, talking to a computer to get that feedback and then have analyzed after, and they can see that as a centralized tool and track the progress over time rather than actually speaking to someone face to face? It kind of builds up that confidence, do you think, in some way?
Absolutely. We've had that has been very common feedback is that students, and it's not that they never want to present in front of
Mm.
anyone, but especially early on when they might feel a little bit hesitant. I mean, there's the quote, public speaking is the number one fear that people have, for example.
Yeah,
And so getting to practice and getting comfortable, whether it's reading or public speaking, very common feedback is that students love that.
yeah, yeah. And in terms of other tools that we haven't touched on yet, are there any ones you might want to highlight that are just about to be released or you have in the pipeline over the next couple of months or so?
Yeah, the I guess maybe before we leave Learning Accelerators, the last one is kind of related. It's called Reading Coach, which is a standalone AI tool that doesn't require teams, meaning you can use it at home standalone, you can use it at school. It's at coach.microsoft.com, and it's also available in M365. So again, it's free. What's nice, it's similar to reading progress, but it's more about students independently practicing reading out loud with this oral reading fluency. The key with AI, though, and this is that engagement part, it's a lot like what it does is it says, "Hey, student, what character would you like this story to be about? What location would you like this story to take place in? Maybe like dogs in space." It lets you pick your characters and locations. And then it generates with AI a little chapter for you to practice reading. So the student, instead of getting a passage that's maybe boring and a topic they don't like, these are topics that are generated with AI that they're interested in because they chose it. It still listens to them read. It still has an inclusive reading surface like Immersive Reader. They still get that coaching feedback. But the kicker is when you finish the chapter, have you ever seen a pick a path book or a choose your own adventure book when you were a kid? It's like, what do you want to happen next in the story?
Yeah,
That's what reading coach does. Okay, what do you want to happen next? Like, the dog walks into the alien spaceship or the dog lands on the planet. What I'm making these things up, but it gives you some choices. So the student then says, okay, I want the story to go this way. And then AI generates the next chapter based on what the student chose. And what it does is it gauges that student to keep practicing reading out loud.
mm,
And again, we found that students love this. They can get achievements, there are streaks, they can save their stories when they're done. And so every time, different stories are created. And students really love that because all of a sudden it's a topic that they care about, which makes them want to practice reading more. So that's kind of a new one that we just came out with about 2 weeks ago.
that's very exciting. And I suppose that really enhances students' creativity as well, right? Which is such an important element of all of these tools to get students thinking more holistically about what they're doing. So, like you said, they're not only having that focused learning, but also they're being creative in the process, right? And creating an individualized story that and did you say you students can save it and then show their other peers and parents and
Yeah,
that thing
yeah,
to make
yeah.
a little booklet, I
And it
suppose.
can actually, the new update is now in multiple languages, so it's not just English. And it lets students track their progress over time so they can see how they're progressing.
Fantastic.
So that's the latest sort of student-facing AI. And then on the educator side, we did a set of things that have sort of rolled out in the last 6 months that are all about saving teachers time. So as an example, in Microsoft Teams for Education, which is our free classroom tool, we have AI rubric creation. So if an educator wants to create a rubric using AI, they can very easily do that. And they can tweak it, they can manually add stuff, and then they can have AI generate the entire thing. So there's multiple options. It doesn't have to be all or nothing, but creating rubrics is one of those can be time intensive for
Mm,
educators. So back to our principles of saving teachers time and being more efficient, we have AI rubrics. We have something called AI instruction generation. So if you want to have instructions for your assignment. Again, not the most glamorous task to write out a bunch of detailed instructions for an assignment. We allow educators to do that using AI with various knobs that allow them to tweak it. We also have things like generating comprehension questions with AI or generating even reading passages with AI for the students. So the idea is the principles around this is keep it in context.
Mm,
So a lot of educators told us, going into a chat experience that is fully open-ended, not, can or cannot give us good results. Sometimes we're not sure how to start or what to do.
mm,
What we did with our AI features for educators is that we built them into context of what they're doing. Meaning, if I'm in Teams for Education and I'm about to create a rubric, why don't you surface the AI rubrics right there when I'm about to create a rubric versus expecting me to go to chat and think about creating a rubric over on the side? We build that AI experience right into the context workflow of what they're doing right there. So if
mm.
I'm making an assignment and I'm about to add instructions, that's when I would add my AI instructions. So
Yeah.
that we have found has actually been highly used because it's in context.
Yeah. Wow. And all of these tools, so Speaker Progress, Math Progress, Reading Coach, they are all freely accessible right now for educators to use in Microsoft
Yep,
Education. Yeah.
free today,
Yeah.
ready to go.
Brilliant. Excellent stuff. Well, Mike, I mean, just sort of now looking forward to my last question. So the future of AI, obviously, it's incredibly fast paced and things are changing so rapidly.
This month
Yeah.
has been unbelievable. The amount of announcements. Oh, I can't
Yeah.
keep up.
It's nuts, isn't it? It's unbelievable. I mean, just in terms of the future, I mean, over the next, I don't know, let's look at the next 6 months to a year, for example, and then maybe project forward over the next couple of years, where, a North Star could be to look to develop future tools. What do you think that's going to look like for Microsoft Education and maybe AI and education more broadly? Let's say 6 to 12 months.
I mean, I think 6 to 12 months with Microsoft Education specifically, Copilot is sort of our big bet around your AI assistant.
Yeah.
And so you'll just see many more both educator Copilot integration features as well as student integration. And I think a lot of it right now is how can we bring the power of AI into a lot of our tool sets to make them more efficient, more useful, more personalized. So there's just a lot of work there to bring all those things together, right? And with the models changing so fast and the capabilities, sometimes you're just about done, and then there's a big model update, and you're like, okay, well now we're gonna update all these capabilities to work right with the new model. So I think the next 6 months to a year, we're just going to continue to build out Copilot, integrate that into different education scenarios, and that's going to be a continued thing.
Mm,
I think, beyond that, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, I think there'll be a lot more personalization. I think there's going to be a lot more easily adapting to students specifically because we're going to have enough information and data on students' assignments and how they're doing to be able to help adapt assignments to them even in a more easy way. That's always been the dream is personalized and adaptable. And so I think all those things are going to be they're going to come to the forefront. But then beyond that, the thing that I get most excited about is a lot of the speech and the interaction and the AI being able to watch your screen, see what you're doing, give you real-time tutoring, for example. I think a lot of people saw the Sal Khan demo
mm,
with the Chat GPT 4.0 Omni model six
mm,
months ago. I mean, that's just the beginning. When you have that natural speech interaction and the AI, Copilot now is something called Copilot Vision, where it can see your screen and you can talk with it. So thinking about those scenarios, especially for students, and being able to interactively talk with anything that the AI is looking at, and the AI can analyze about anything in terms of any subject, and it's only getting better. I think those real time, whether you call it tutoring or companion or assistant, and
mm,
being able to naturally interact with voice and vision, I think is incredibly powerful for education. I mean, I
mm.
already see it with my daughter and the way that she interacts with AI and being able to, and again, it's not in the sense of I know everyone's worried about, oh, AI is going to solve the problem or write the essay, but I've just seen in my own household where my daughter is interacting to better understand when she gets stuck in certain problems. Uh, a lot of times it used to be she would come to me and I haven't done this math in 25 years or 35 years. And she's like, "Hey, Dad, can you help explain this part of the problem?" And I'd be like, "Okay, well, I have to go like relearn that thing again
Yeah.
first because I can't remember how to do it anymore myself." But the interactions with AI can explain it really well. I mean, I've been kind of blown away, and that's just going to get better. The voice interaction is going to get better. So I think going in that direction, I think it's going to be quite powerful. And the inclusive nature, like all the inclusive and accessibility pieces, all the text to speech, the speech to text, the translate in any language, all those things are areas of accessibility and inclusion in my mind.
Mm.
And they're just getting like that is in everything now.
Yeah.
And so students who have different ways of learning, whether it's dyslexia, dysgraphia, ADHD, mobility impairments, AI makes all those things actually quite inclusive. And
Mm.
so I think in that direction, technology is even more helpful, in my opinion, in terms of inclusive and accessible scenarios.
And in terms of the key challenges, would you say it is reaching all students at their level, would you say? Or what would you say are sort of maybe one of the two key challenges over the next sort of 6 to 12, and then looking forward over the next 3 to 5 years in terms of AI integration for education?
I mean, I think reaching students at their level won't be the challenge. I think the challenge might be more around which of these models goes offline. Like not everyone has internet access, and I know that a lot more of the models are have the ability to go offline now. So I think that's actually quite a big challenge. If you are in a place that doesn't have internet, does your device support these models? How can you get access? I think the languages part and the multimodal access, that part I'm not as worried about, but it's more about how can all students have access whether they have internet or not is probably a challenge.
Mm.
I think there's also just that whole responsible AI piece and just really making sure privacy and sort of data compliance, data privacy, the ability to ensure that we keep our response, not just Microsoft, all companies who are doing this, that responsible AI layer, right? Fairness, transparency, accountability, and making sure that the students are in a safe environment when they're using the AI and that the guardrails are properly on for younger students. The quote guardrails for a 8-year old are much different than the guardrails for an 18-year-old.
Mm.
I mean, just as an example, with Reading Coach that I talked about, that is not an open-ended prompting system, right? Like we have young students using it, but they're literally their only choices they're making are choosing your character, choosing your location, and reading out loud. Like it's not like they're asking questions like how do I make a nuclear bomb into the reading coach. It's much more guardrailed, it's much more constrained. And so I think those are really important considerations of what constraints at what ages, make sense.
Yeah. And when your team is designing and creating these tools and then releasing them, how do you ensure those guardrails are properly aligned? Is it one of the key priorities that sort of goes through every thread
Oh,
of creating this tool?
absolutely. That is
Yeah.
probably the most important part of
Yeah.
when we're releasing AI in education. There's a very intense internal process that we go through with the responsible AI. It's actually multiple times. Whether we have it's called a review board we go through. There's something called red teaming where it gets tested out intensely. There's actually multiple layers that it goes through before it gets released. And even after all the multiple layers, it goes into private preview. And there's a requirement that after your AI feature is in a private preview, all the data that comes in is analyzed again before it goes out more broadly. So it's not like you go through some process once and they're like, okay, see ya.
Yeah.
You go through the process, you go through the steps, you test it out with a very small group of people, you get that feedback, go through the process again, review it. So it's actually a multi-phased process. It's quite rigorous.
Brilliant. Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Mike. That was absolutely fascinating to get those insights. And yeah, looking forward to seeing progress over the next 3, 6, 12 months, a year, 2 years. Who knows where we'll end up with all of this, but it's so,
Absolutely. I'm
so
excited
exciting.
too.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Mike. Appreciate it.
Okay, thank you.